The mainstream media reports a rise of the far right in Europe. They talk about the Holocaust and Germany's newly elected AfD, telling us that they are the fascists and that they are a threat to our democracy. But when you hear that Mussolini had a Jewish mistress for 27 years, Margherita Sarfatti, that there were 10,000 Jews in the Fascist Party of Italy, and that Mussolini and the Italian fascists also refused to deport Jews to the National Socialist camps, saving tens of thousands of lives, you then realise that National Socialism is not the same as fascism. Fascism is something else. And the media, and even the mainstream historians, do not know what fascism is. So the question then becomes, if the fascists are not racists, what is the idea behind fascism? What does it actually stand for? Well, in this video, I'm going to clearly explain the idea behind it, because it turns out that fascism is, in fact, a religion. Some of them will deny that, but it is, and there's ample proof of that. And by the way, it is illegal in the United Kingdom to be hostile to a religion. And so, because fascism and National Socialism are religions, I cannot offer ill will, spite, contempt, prejudice, unfriendliness, antagonism, resentment, or dislike towards fascists or National Socialists. Therefore, I will be merely sticking to facts and disagreeing with them on an intellectual level. But you can write whatever you like in the comment section below. So, to understand fascism, let's go back to Italy. Mussolini was obviously the guy in charge. He was the driving force of the movement. But while he certainly did contribute to the ideology, fascism was built upon the ideas of Giovanni Gentile. Giovanni Gentile was the philosophical founder of fascism. He was the one who gave it its foundation. And the core component, the fundamental base of his philosophy that all the rest of fascism is built upon, is the idea that the physical world around us is created by the human mind. Yes, Gentile said that the world around us is created by our minds. Now, for many of you this may seem crazy at first glance, because it is. However, it turns out that lots of philosophers throughout history, as well as many people today, believe in the same or similar idea. These people are known as idealists, and they truly believe that a spirit or a consciousness creates reality. And the question is, how did they come to this idea? What was their thought process that led them to such a belief? Well, to explain this, we have to go back to the ancient Greeks. Heraclitus was one of the first philosophers we know about, and Heraclitus was obsessed with change. He believed that everything was constantly changing. You can't step into the same river twice, for fresh waters are always flowing in. The waters of the river are constantly moving, and therefore it is constantly changing. It's not the same river from moment to moment. And this, said Heraclitus, is contradictory. If I take a match, strike the match, and then let it burn out, is it the same match? Yes, but also no. It's different than it was before I struck it, and yet it's also the same match. To Heraclitus, this was a contradiction, and he said that change requires contradictions. After Heraclitus, we get Protagoras. Protagoras was the founder of Sophism, and he agreed with Heraclitus, but took it a step further. Protagoras said that if everything is constantly changing and contradictory, then there cannot be an objective reality. In fact, we cannot even trust our senses. Your eyes may see one colour, while someone else may see another. What you think is blue, I may see as pink. And nobody truly sees the world correctly. Everyone's got a different viewpoint because we all have different sensory organs. Thus, there is no objective reality. Everything is subjective, meaning each of us sees the world differently and we live in our own private world. And Plato, the Christians, Immanuel Kant, and most other philosophers, including Giovanni Gentile and the fascists, agree entirely with this argument. But it's a short hop, skip and jump from this idea to another. If we cannot trust our senses to give us an accurate reflection of reality, and there is no objective reality, then perhaps, Gregor said, nothing exists at all. And if it did exist, you couldn't know it or prove it. How can you say that what you're seeing is real if I see it differently? You may be able to touch an object, but you're relying entirely on your senses, and my senses may see something different about it. So we can never know if an object truly is real or not. Nothing exists. Even if something exists, nothing can be known about it. And even if something can be known about it, knowledge about it can't be communicated to others. So, congratulations everyone, you don't exist. Now obviously this is stupid, however, it's one thing to point out that something is wrong, but explaining why it's wrong is a bit more difficult. And so, to answer the sophists, Socrates and then Plato said, aha, before proceeding to come up with a highly influential philosophy known as Platonism. They started talking about the concept known as universals. Here is a pen, and here is a different pen. This particular pen has a clicker. This one has a lid, or did do. And yet, we know that these two different or particular pens are pens. How? How does our mind know that these two different pens are both pens? Well, it's because, Plato says, we have the universal concept of penness already in our minds. Each is a particular pen, but penness is the universal concept uniting the two particular pens together. And when we see the pens, our mind draws upon the knowledge we already had of penness, and once our mind has done that, we then know that what we see are pens. What this then allows Plato to say is, yes, each pen is different, they are not the same, and they are changing if I use the ink, but I can prove that they exist because they're in our minds. They are conceptually in existence. Our minds have penness already baked into them, and when I see a pen-like object, we know that they are pens. And so we can prove that they exist using our minds. So minds create reality, which is more or less what the fascists believe, but we're not quite there yet. So we know via concepts that things exist, but while this may have answered the sophists, it presented another problem. I can hold these particular pens, I can feel them and see them, and if I was that way inclined I could also taste them, but I can't touch penness. Penness doesn't exist. Penness is an abstraction, it's purely in the mind. But how can something exist in our mind but not exist in reality? Where do we draw upon the knowledge of penness from? Well, obviously, Plato said, our minds must exist in a different world. And I'm pausing for dramatic stupidity. Yes, this is a thing. According to Plato, there are two different worlds, two realms of existence. The first is this particular world containing pens and our bodies, which is a multiple changing material world that is known only by the senses. And the second world is the universal world of penness, which is one unchanging non-material world known only by the mind. This second world is seen as perfect by Plato because unlike our imperfect world, the world of concepts is not changing. It contains the perfect unchanging pen, the perfect unchanging man, the perfect unchanging house, and the perfect unchanging YouTube video, which according to this logic would be just a still photograph apparently? Well, Plato's world of essences, also known as Plato's world of forms, is an ethereal reality that exists somewhere out there, that contains all the perfect ideas that exist. And here you were thinking that it was just the fascists who were crazy. Clearly, Plato was higher than Afro Man when he dreamt this nonsense up. So let me just bring together all that we've heard so far. Everything is changing, which means that everything is contradictory. Therefore, we cannot trust our senses, and when we see the world around us, we pull that information into our minds from a different spiritual reality. The concepts in this world of forms are known as universals. And one thing that I haven't said yet is that Plato said that these universals are arranged in a hierarchy. Let me explain why. Think of a brick. This is a particular brick, and this is another particular brick. Together they form a universal called brickness. Put enough of these particular bricks together and you get a house. But notice this is one particular house, and here's another. We now have a new universal called houseness. So a lot of bricks make a smaller number of houses, thus there is a hierarchy here. The brickness creates houseness, and because of the smaller number of houses compared to bricks, houseness is higher up the hierarchy. And following this logic, Plato says that all universals are arranged in a hierarchical structure that goes all the way to a single point. Plato calls this ultimate point the form of the good, which he says everything else is aiming at. It then becomes the thing that everything is created from, and so this is basically God. Although Plato's form of the good is only universal goodness at this stage, it has no plan, no will, and no awareness, so it's not God yet. Only later would it get a personality and thus become God. In the meantime, Plato said that another god, known as the demiurgos, meaning craftsman or artisan, looked at this universal goodness, plus the world of forms, with one eye, and then created the world of particulars that we live in using the other eye. This was therefore an early form of creationism. So let's just think this through a second. This reality is created by a god, be he the demiurgus or the Christian god or whatever. A god of some kind creates reality. And what is a god? A consciousness. God, in the Christian sense, is the ultimate consciousness, but it's a consciousness nonetheless. So a conscious mind has created reality, mind over matter. Therefore, when I said at the beginning that the fascists and Giovanni Gentile believe that human minds create reality, the only difference between them and Plato and the Christians is who creates reality. Obviously, the Christians would say that God creates reality, while Gentile would say it was us who create reality, but regardless, some kind of consciousness creates reality, and that concept of consciousness creating reality is known as idealism. The ideal is some kind of spiritual conscious mind that creates reality. Idealism in philosophy is any view that stresses the central role of the ideal or the spiritual in the interpretation of experience. It may hold that the world or reality exists essentially as spirit or consciousness, that abstractions and laws are more fundamental in reality than sensory things, or at least that whatever exists is known in dimensions that are chiefly mental, through and as ideas. And because the mind is seen as rational, Plato's particular theory of knowledge, epistemology, is known as rationalism. So the idea that the mind creates reality is idealism, and the idea that knowledge comes from the rational thought of the mind is known as rationalism. But some people rejected this theory of knowledge, at least in part, saying that instead of the mind, we should rely entirely on what we can sense, what we can see with our eyes and our hands, etc. Men are physical things, and so we can confirm our own existence by simply relying on our senses. I can see myself, I can put my hand on my arm, therefore I exist. And this idea of experiencing something with our senses in order to confirm its existence is known as empiricism. Most of modern science is based on empiricism. History theory is based on empiricism, at least it was until recently. The idea that you should just stick to the facts, that if only you were a blank slate, a tabula rasa, you could get to the truth. Because as we all know, rocks write the best history books. The idea that you should not dare say the words, I think, when writing an essay, nope, that's a deadly sin, this all comes from empiricism. You should just observe things, not think about it, and just repeat what you see or hear. Thou shalt not have a personality. You are just a robot, and there is no knowledge outside of what we can sense. I'm not going to go through the entire history of empiricism, but I'll just briefly run through some names for those who are curious. Empiricism technically has its origins with the atomists of ancient Greece, specifically Democritus and Epicurus, who came up with materialism. Empiricism was developed further by Aristotle, solidified by the likes of Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and then championed much later by Berkeley and Hume. And the most important thing to note here is that there are two distinct groups of people throughout history. On the one hand, we have the empiricists who rely entirely on what they can sense, particular things, and the rationalists who believe that our knowledge comes from a world that we cannot see, the universals. All the philosophers up until Hume could be categorized into these two camps, the ones who are sense-orientated, the empiricists, and the ones who are concept-orientated, the rationalists. Hume and his disciples took empiricism to its most logical conclusion, which ended up being an attack upon reason in the name of reason. Hume's argument was that there were no universals at all, only particulars. There was no such thing as penness, only pens. There is only what we see or observe. There is a brick, and there is a house, and there is a man, but there is no brickness, no houseness, no manness. There are only individual men. Every man is an island. This idea is known as nominalism, and Hume was an arch-nominalist and sensualist. Any form of concept is thrown out, and he takes it to the extreme. Society doesn't exist, and neither do ourselves. Your body exists, but your mind, your consciousness, your spirit does not. How can it do? Nobody else can feel your mind. Nobody else can sense it. You have a body, but you don't have a physical self or spirit. The self is a concept, and therefore it doesn't exist. And so, in the name of reason, Hume denied things that obviously exist in reality, but which can't be justified by sense perception alone. In doing so, Hume opened the door to Immanuel Kant, who inherits Hume's disintegrated universe of particulars without any concepts connecting them together. So what does Kant do? Kant rejects both of the old categories of philosophers and says we've been doing it all wrong. He says, does it really matter if we can know reality or not? If we can't know reality, let's just dispense with reality altogether. Kant therefore decides to put the universe back together, and the way he does it is by performing a synthesis. Hume left us with a universe like Humpty Dumpty after the fall. Kant is going to synthesize the fragments and give us an intelligible world again. Between the physical world and our consciousness, says Kant, there is a complex machine called the mind. Our mind, he says, synthesizes everything together before it gives us the data. So knowledge doesn't come from our senses and it doesn't come from our concepts, it comes from the structure of the mind itself. In other words, our mind is what creates reality. There you go, Giovanni Gentile was not the first to say this, he didn't just make it up, Immanuel Kant had said it first. And note, it's the structure of the mind that determines how you think and act. Thus, if you are born with a bad mind, then you will be bad. You cannot change the structure of your mind. You're stuck with it. And I'm sure some of you can see some problems with that. This is the philosophical basis for modern racism, for example. Kant's philosophy is known as transcendental idealism, meaning spiritual idealism, or the spiritual mind creates reality. After Kant, we get Hegel, and Hegel threw out reality altogether. Hegel and Kant were both trying to prove that God exists, because they were both Hermeticists. According to the Hermeticists, God is like Plato's God. God doesn't know he's God. He's just the highest point in the hierarchy, who's ignorant of his own reality, his own identity. Therefore, Hegel proposes that this God, which he calls the Spirit or the Absolute, is driven by the need to discover its own identity. God has to discover that there isn't anything else except himself. So God creates the material world as a mirror, because in order for God to know himself, he has to see himself from the point of view of someone else. So he creates mankind in order to use mankind to look at himself and realize that he's God. Mankind's purpose, according to Hegel and the Hermeticists, is to act as a mirror to reflect the image of God back at God. And when all of mankind is united as one in one giant state, they become the giant mirror that's needed to reflect God. When mankind is united, God will see himself and become complete. Well, Hegel thought, using his dialectical idealism, that he had figured it all out. Hegel's consciousness had discovered the truth, he thought. And so, when he died, Hegelians genuinely believed that God now knew the truth. And therefore, many Hegelians decided that there was nothing else left to do but sit around doing nothing, because the material world was about to go out of existence at any moment. So they waited a while, and then some of them started to have doubts. The Hegelians split into two groups, those who still believed in Hegel, and those that thought that while his teachings were correct, his conclusions were wrong. This latter group was known as the Young Hegelians. From this group, we get two important people. The first is Ludwig Feuerbach, who directly influenced Karl Marx. Marx developed his philosophy, which is called dialectical materialism. And from Hegel, we also get Bertrando Spaventa. From Spaventa, we then get Giovanni Gentile, the philosophical founder of Fascism, with his philosophy, actual idealism. So, let's just run through everything that we've just heard so that we're all clear on what's going on. Everything is changing, which means that everything is contradictory. Therefore, we cannot trust our senses, and when we see the world around us, we pull that information into our minds from a different spiritual reality. The concepts in this spiritual reality are known as universals. these universals are arranged in a hierarchy, with the tip of the hierarchy being the ultimate good. This later becomes the concept of God. God is a consciousness that creates material reality, and, at least according to Hegel, who's getting this from Plato and the Hermeticists, is unconscious. That's right, God is a consciousness that is unconscious. Hegel then said, if we hold up a mirror to God, God will realise he is God, and we will all be united with him. After Hegel dies, there is a split in his followers, from which we then get Karl Marx and the Marxists, and Giovanni Gentile with the Fascists. Idealism is the idea that reality is created by consciousness. Kant's philosophy was called transcendental idealism. The spiritual mind creates reality. Following this, Hegel's philosophy was known as dialectical idealism. The transcendent mind creates reality. And then there was a split with Marx coming up with dialectical materialism, the transcendence of this fake material reality. And note he gets the dialectic from Hegel and the materialism from the empiricists. And we also get Giovanni Gentile with actual idealism. The idealism part he gets from Hegel, and I'll explain what actual idealism is in a second. But the point here, the important point here, is that the reason the fascists and the Marxists hate each other isn't because they're opposites. No. The reason they hate each other is because they're competing on the same ground. They're both trying to reawaken God, but in their own way, and so they're competing with each other for your spiritual belief. The Marxists believe that they need to unite the world to get to God, whereas the fascists believe they can reawaken God with just a nation. One is international, the other is national. But even that's not true because some fascists are international. So these are just different variants of the same religion, like Protestants and Catholics, and that's why they hate each other. But as I said, from Hegel we get Bertrando Spaventa, and then Giovanni Gentile, the philosophical founder of fascism. But what does Gentile believe? Well, Giovanni Gentile borrowed a concept from Berkeley, saying that objects outside of our consciousness are self-contradictory. The idea goes that things do not exist until we sense them. Said differently, I look at something and that's when it appears. Thus, when we sense them, these things aren't there in the outside world, oh no, they're actually in our minds. We see them and they become part of our consciousness. They're not real, they're not out there, they're just ideas in our minds. And so the world does not exist. It cannot exist without the mind. Reality is conceivable only insofar as the reality conceived is in relation to the activity which conceives it. And in that relation, it is not only a possible object of knowledge, it is a present and actual one. To conceive reality is to conceive, at the same time and as one with it, the mind, in which that reality is represented. And therefore, the concept of a material reality is absurd. Another way of thinking about this, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, Gentile's answer is that if nobody's seen the tree before, then it doesn't exist in the first place. Only when someone is able to look at something, or detect it, does it exist. It's sort of like when scientists try to look at subatomic particles, the mere act of looking at them changes their behaviour. Well, Giovanni Gentile would say it's not that looking at them changes their behaviour, it's that they don't exist until you look at them. You're creating them by looking at them. The empiricist said, "We see it, therefore we know it to be real." Taking his cue from Hegel, Gentile concluded that the external world is a fiction. It cannot be proven to exist because everything is created by the mind. We essentially dream it up, and our senses sense the dream. So nothing is actually real, it's all in our heads. Whatever is found is either invented or constructed by thought, and can be nothing other than thought. For the modern scientist, natural or mathematical science is not imagined to be a representation of an independent reality, but a construction fashioned by the spirit. Nothing transcends thought. Thought is absolute immanence. It is a reality which waits for us to construct. A reality which is true, even now, of love and will. Because it is the inward effort of the soul, its living process, not its ideal and external model. It is man himself who rises above humanity and becomes God. And even God is no longer a reality who already is, but the God who is begotten in us, and is ourselves insofar as we with our whole being rise to him. Here, mind is no longer intellect, but will. The world is no longer what is known, but what is made, and therefore not only can we begin to conceive the mind as freedom or moral activity, but the world, the whole world of the Christian is freed and redeemed. The whole world is a world which is what it would be, or a world, as we say, essentially moral. We may say of spiritual reality what the great Christian writers have said of God. Whoever seeks him shall find him. But to find spiritual reality, one must be willing to put his whole being into the search, as though he would satisfy the deepest needs of his own life. Therefore, faith is a virtue, and supposes love. In this lies the folly of the atheist damns, that the existence of God should be proved to him without his being relieved of his atheism. Equally fatuous is the materialist denial of spiritual reality. He would have the philosopher show him spirit in nature. Nature which, by its very definition, is the absence of mind. So, idealism is the philosophy that says objects in the world are ideas, ideals, or spiritual concepts. It says they only exist in the mind of God or the people who see them. Reality is nothing other than a spiritual consciousness. Gentile's philosophy is called actual idealism, with the word actual substituting the word total. Actual idealism is total idealism, or the totality of the mind creating reality. It's mind over everything. It's not just mind over matter, it's matter doesn't exist, it's all in our minds. Whatever is nothing. It becomes something by becoming spirit, self-consciousness. The whole creation of the universe is here in the self-creation of the spirit. Now, it must be stressed that Gentile believed that this process happens collectively. If I go into a new area of the woods and find a rock, my mind has created that rock, but your mind also receives that rock's existence remotely, so that when you go into the woods, you will see that rock too. I created it and then it was shared spiritually with you. So it's a collective spirituality. Things don't exist until a human sees it, but when a human sees it, we all collectively share it spiritually. Gentile then says, look guys, we're all connected spiritually, we're all social creatures, we're all connected together by our minds and our spirit. Therefore, we should all unite together. So for Gentile, the spiritual connection we all share justifies his collectivism. And because we're all connected, we should, he says, create an ethical state that benefits the whole of the community. And getting a bit technical here, plus also annoying some people, Gentile said that the human being was not an atom. Being Hegelian and dialectic, Gentile said that the ego required a non-ego. Thus, humans were in fact made of two beings, yourself and a partner, a non-self. And together they are a society, a third thing within ourselves. The third position from this, the synthesis, was a transcendental ego, a spiritual ego. So we have ourselves, our non-selves, and our spiritual selves. In other words, every human being was actually a society of three, a transcendental society, a spiritual society. The reason why this might be controversial is because it was between 1912 and 1916 that Gentile laid out his actual idealism. And I could be wrong here, but it looks like Giovanni Gentile beat Carl Jung to the dialectical egoism idea, plus the collective unconsciousness idea, which Jung seems to have come up with in 1916. Or maybe they were bouncing ideas off each other. I'm not sure because I can't read Italian to confirm the dates with Gentile, but it looks like they came to the same conclusion at about the same time. And Jung was also a disciple of Freud, who came from Ludwig Feuerbach and then Hegel. So I wanted to point this out because modern psychology is based on a hermetic Hegelian spirituality that believes that we are split into a holy trinity. It's not based on science, it's not based on reason, it's based on religion. That's the reason why modern psychologists tend to come out with weird and wacky theories, because they're just spiritualists. Anyway, to really boil down Giovanni Gentile's philosophy to its most basic elements, Gentile believed that the mind creates reality. Therefore, it's down to us to shape our world for ourselves. We are in total control over our lives and of the world around us, which we can actively change through action. Which is why fascist leader Oswald Mosley was a big fan of the word action in Britain. And then, using the dialectic, Gentile says we are all social creatures, we're all socially connected, and therefore we should create an ethical state that benefits the whole of the community. The nation, for Gentile, was not merely a bunch of individuals brought together by a common cause, a concept he called immoral. The nation, he said, united everyone together in one state, one super consciousness. And it is through the state and the nation that the individual makes himself. Individualism and egoism, he said, were problems to be overcome. And Gentile said that true self-fulfillment can only be attained by becoming one with the state and the historic community. One crucial point to take away from all this is that while we are connected spiritually, Gentile recognised that the individual was an independent consciousness. This is in contrast to Karl Marx, who said that there was no individual at all. According to Marx, the individual as such is not real. Only the social individual is real. The individual outside society and history is an abstraction. The essence of man cannot be determined other than as a species, determined by the totality of social relations. Man, for Marx, was in essence not an individual, but a communal being, an assessment that was an unmistakable Hegelian influence. This is where Marx's tribalism comes from. Marx used materialism to divide humanity into classes, genders and races, which he then pitted against each other in a bitter struggle for his own amusement. Gentile rejected this view, saying that the individual was a spiritual being who could only truly find himself if he was absorbed into a community, the nation-state. Man, for Gentile, couldn't exist outside of a community because man was, at his heart, a communal being. And I absolutely need to point this out. Actual idealists believe that your mind creates reality. Your mind, your consciousness, creates your physical, material body. Racism, therefore, doesn't make sense to an actual idealist. The material world is an illusion created by your mind. It's your mind that matters, not your body. So even if your material body is bad, even if your material blood is bad, then all you need to do is convert your mind over to the good side and you're good. Actual idealism fundamentally rejects materialism and determinism, making racism impossible. As one of Giovanni Gentile's students said, "All human beings deserve our respect if only because they are human and carry, as we do, the mark of divine creation." So this is why the original Italian fascists, including Mussolini and Giovanni Gentile, were not racists, at least until the late 1930s when Hitler came along. Mussolini had a Jewish mistress for 27 years, Margherita Sarfatti. There were 10,000 Jews in the Fascist Party of Italy. There was no mention of racism in the Doctrine of Fascism written by Gentile and signed by Mussolini. And in 1937, Gentile even wrote a piece saying that German anti-Semitism was a monstrous barbarism that was inappropriate to civilized society. Before the late 1930s, Mussolini had never betrayed any evidence of anti-Semitism. Until that time, in fact, fascist Italy had provided more refuge for Jews fleeing National Socialism than almost any other nation. Mussolini had not written an Italian Mein Kampf. He had no master plan, nor did he believe in a master race or detest the Jews. But after falling in with Hitler in the late 1930s, Mussolini had to adopt some form of anti-Semitism. So the Manifesto of Fascist Racism was published on the 15th of July 1938. This legislation barred Jews from schools and universities, the armed forces, and from state employment. However, we must also acknowledge that even though they used biological language in the law, they actually defined the Jewish race on religious grounds, not biology. This was a religious type of anti-Semitism, not biological. And in fact, many Jews were exempt from the law. And you could convert from being Jewish to being Italian, which is why not a single Jewish person was murdered by Mussolini's fascist Italy. These exemptions were a clear reflection of why the fascists objected to the Jews. What counted was spirit, not race. Fascist anti-Semitism was, therefore, akin to the hatred of the infidel, of non-believers. But a Jew could embrace the fascist faith, convert to fascism if he so chose. Whatever evidence is available suggests that both fascists and non-fascists alike were surprised by the regime's decision to embark on racism of whatever sort. To all those Italians in any way involved with the issue, the immediate threat of anti-Semitism was more than disconcerting. Italy's 45 or 50,000 Jews were well assimilated. The number of Italian Jews who were members of the fascist party exceeded their ratio in the population, and it is clear that for years Mussolini considered Italian Jews facilitators of Italian culture to the outside world. And to round this off, a significant number of Italian and foreign Jews later testified to Giovanni Gentile's assistance and support to Jewish refugees. In Hitler's eyes, if you are born Jewish, you're Jewish. There's nothing you can do about that. You have the magic Jewish blood, and therefore you're bad. For the Italian fascists, the original fascists, with their actual idealism, the mind creates reality. So if you are Jewish, you can change your mind. That is the fundamental difference between fascism and National Socialism. National Socialism requires racism. It's built into the ideology at a fundamental philosophical level. In the original fascism, biological racism is not there at all. It may contain a religious anti-Semitism towards the end, although it was anti-Catholic too, because it wants everyone to convert to fascism, which is a religion in and of itself. But it's not biological racism. And that is a vitally important distinction. Thus, fascism and National Socialism are not the same. They are two fundamentally different ideologies. One is biologically racist, the other is not. And they only get lumped together partly because of the language barrier. Not as many people could speak Italian as German, and mostly because of Marxist and Soviet propaganda. That is the reason why you're not allowed to know what fascism really is, because it's competing on the same ground as Marxism. And just in case it wasn't clear, no, I'm not a fascist. No, I don't believe the world was created by the human mind, and no, I'm not a totalitarian. I'm not defending fascism or anything else like that. I am merely explaining the ideology as accurately as I can as a historian. And this then leads us to the totalitarian idea. Gentile said that man couldn't exist outside of a community because man was, at his heart, a communal being. This is the idea of the universals, as we heard before. The particulars must become universals. Man must become manness. And how does manness manifest itself in the real world? The state. For Gentile, the state was the physical manifestation of the universal for men, manness. Man is the state is man. For fascism, the state and the individual are one, or better, perhaps, state and individual are terms that are inseparable in a necessary synthesis. The state is within us, mature, alive, and of necessity living and growing and expanding and elevating itself in dignity, and conscious of itself and of its high duties, and the grand goals to which it is called in our will, in our thought, and in our passions. The individual develops, and the state develops. As Zoltan, a modern fascist, states, this dynamic, self-determining process of reality, where consciousness and materiality are synthesized, brings forth the perpetual becoming of absolute spirit, with the corporate state as the living actualization of this philosophical evolution. Gentile implements this through his praxis of thought and action. The fascist state, therefore, as distinct from the nationalist state, is an entirely spiritual creation. It is a national state because, from the point of view of fascism, it is the result of spiritual action rather than a presupposition. But this state that realizes itself in the consciousness and will of the individual, rather than being imposed from on high, cannot have the same relationship with the people imagined by nationalism. The nationalist state was an aristocratic state that constructed itself out of the force it inherited from its origin, that made it valued by the masses. The fascist state, on the other hand, is a popular state, and, in that sense, a democratic state par excellence. Let's just think about this for a second. Manness is the state. And if the state is us, and we are the state, then the state is democratic. The state is us. We are the state. I mean, you can't get more democratic than that, can you? So Gentile says, the fascist state is a democratic state par excellence. And it is. If we're all connected spiritually, then the state is us and we are the state. It doesn't represent us, it is us. It's direct democracy. So if you're sitting there saying, well, you're a Democrat and you're for democracy, fascism is the ultimate form of democracy. And you might say, no, but fascism is a threat to our democracy. No, it is democracy. And now you know why some people are fanatical in their fascism. They're fighting for freedom. They're fighting for real democracy. Just as you're willing to fight for your democracy, they're willing to fight just as hard for theirs. So let's bring this all together now. The original Italian fascism was not only democratic, it was real democracy. And it wasn't biologically racist either. The reason why was because its philosophy, actual idealism, developed by Giovanni Gentile, said that man is a spiritual, communal being who shapes reality in his mind. And I know for a fact that the vast majority of the people watching this believe in democracy, believe that a man is a communal being, believe that the strong state should intervene in the market on behalf of society, and that a consciousness of some kind has created reality. Well, you are completely vulnerable, completely defenseless. You have no counter to this. And that's the reason why the mainstream media and the Marxists and the liberal elite don't want you to know what fascism is, because you're totally exposed to it. It is for the people, by the people, because it is the people. It is not conservative, it is revolutionary. It is nationalism and socialism. And a fascio was a trade union in Italy, so the word fascism itself means trade unionism, syndicalism. And fascism is defined as the totalitarian, cooperative, and ethical state. The final collectivist synthesis of nationalism, syndicalism, and actualism. Actualism is just the old word for actual idealism. So it's three things in unison. Nationalism, syndicalism, which is trade unionism, and actual idealism, the totality of the human mind. A simple nationalist does not believe that the world is created by the minds of men. A nationalist may also not believe in trade unionism, syndicalism, and may not believe in the corporate state, the trade union state. And conservatives, who want things to remain as they are, perhaps with an oligarchy or an aristocracy, these people are not fascists either. Neither are religious people like Jordan Peterson. He may be many things, but he's not a fascist. And this brings us right back to the beginning. The mainstream media reports a rise of the far right in Europe, and perhaps this is true, but fascists are not far right. They are third positionists. The media talks about the Holocaust, but the Italian fascists didn't participate in the Holocaust, and in fact, they did their best to protect the Jews in Italy. The media also says Germany's newly elected AfD is a threat to our democracy. Maybe, but from what I've read, they're not actual idealists. They're not fascists. Neither is the whole of Northern England, Mr. Starmer. So, they're not fascists. But fascism may still be on the rise, since many people are totally exposed and open to their ideas. And if you are concerned with the rise of fascism and or want to know how to combat the ideas of actual fascism, then you're in the right place. My intention is to create a series of videos detailing what fascism and National Socialism are, precisely defining them, just like I've done here, so that we're absolutely certain we know what they are, and then my intention is to show you exactly why these ideologies are not just incorrect, but unethical and deeply flawed. And I won't be arguing, oh, they're just racists and bigots. That's not where I'm going to come from. I will be systematically deconstructing these ideologies at their root. No, the mind does not make reality. Altruism is evil. Materialism, idealism, empiricism, and dialectics are all nonsense. That's where I'm going to come from. So I encourage you to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and in the meantime check out my other videos on fascism and National Socialism here. Thanks for watching and supporting. Bye for now.